Warlock is one of the most customizable classes in the game, largely due to a class feature called Eldritch Invocations. In this video, I'm going to be covering the updated options for these from the 2024 Player's Handbook, plus a few older options you might find to be relevant. My name is Nathan, and here on this channel, I make videos about character builds and other Dungeons & Dragons content, including things like this one where I'm reviewing a class feature. So if this is the content that you enjoy, liking the video, leaving a comment and subscribing go a long way to help the channel and help others find this content. So if that's you, thank you and welcome. So here is our agenda for this video. First, we're going to cover what invocations are, and then I'll go out how I'm going to be rating the options that are going to be available. And then we're going to go through all of the invocations in the 2024 Player's Handbook, followed by a few notable options, mostly out of Xanathar's. I'm going to put timestamps in the description of this video to all of the different invocations, so if there's a specific one that you want, you can use those to navigate through the video. All right, so first, what are invocations? So these are basically miniature class features that allow you to customize your character to do a variety of things. Invocations, in a way, make the Warlock kind of a Swiss Army knife of a class. You have all these different tools, and you get to choose what to put in. There's options to support a variety of playstyles, whether you want to lean more into damage dealing, you want to be more martial, you want more control, you want to be a better support, you want utility. There are ways to do all of these things and more with invocations. An important thing to note is that all of the Pact boons, which you used to get at Warlock level 3, are now invocations, and they're available at level 1. Importantly, they are also not mutually exclusive, so you can now have anywhere from 0 to 3 packs. At least those are the ones that are available. There's a 4th pack that was introduced in Tasha's you might be able to homebrew, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. In terms of the progression for invocations, I made a table here. So you begin with 1 at level 1, then you get 2 additional at level 2, 2 more at level 5, another 1 at level 7, another 1 at level 9, and then 12, 15, and 18. Importantly, you do get 2 total more invocations under the 2024 rules than you did under the 2014 rules. And also, you can swap out an invocation every time you gain a Warlock level. So if you have one that's good for a while, but then you don't like, you can replace it later. So here is how I'm going to be kind of grading the invocations in this video. So there's 2 different factors I'm going to be scoring them on from a 1 to 5. The first factor is demand. So demand is basically how many Warlock builds can make use of this particular invocation. If I give something a 5 on demand, it's something I think pretty much every Warlock build should probably take. A 4 is something most Warlock builds can use. A 3 is something you'll want for a specific Warlock build. 2s are more niche, and a 1 is something that I don't think you should ever take. Impact is when you do take this, how powerful is it? And a 5 in the impact category is something that I'm defining as a build-defining type feature. This is something where it's going to completely change the way your character plays, and it's something that you can build around. A 4 is going to be a significant impact, so while it may not, be something that changes how your character plays, it's going to be very strong numerically or provide you with a lot of decent options. 3 is something that's decent, it's a nice to have, but not as major as the other ones. A 2 is a pretty minor bump, and a 1 is an insignificant impact. Just as a thing of note, I didn't actually give any of the invocations presented in this book a 1 on either category. And then I'm going to add our demand and impact numbers together to produce what I'm going to call a composite score, which could range from 2 to 10. In terms of what the composite scores, this will kind of break the invocations down into 4 major categories. So if something has a 9, I would consider this something to be a core thing that you pretty much want on every Warlock. There is only 1 invocation that falls into this category. Things that have a total of 8 are things that I would say are build defining. These are things where it's a build around feature, and if you're going to be playing a Warlock a certain way, you probably want them. And then anything from 5 to 7 is a luxury invocation. These are things that provide nice options or decent boosts, and they're things that you should fit in if you have space, but they're usually not going to be a priority depending on your build, as much as higher ranked things. And then anything 4 or less is something that I think is just bad, and outside of very niche scenarios you probably shouldn't take. Now, as we go into these ratings are just my opinion and are based on my preferences and my experiences. If I didn't rank an invocation the way that you might have, whether better or worse, please let me know in the comments and explain why, and I'd be more than happy to discuss any and all of the invocations presented in this video. All right, so so the way I'm going to go through the invocations from the 2024 Player's Handbook, I'm going to go through them by the level they're available and then alphabetically. So this means our first invocation is Armor of Shadows. This is part of an invocation that I'm going to call the spells group of invocations. There's a lot of invocations that give you some kind of spell that you can cast at will without spending a spell slot. And this one gives you Mage Armor. So what the Mage Armor spell does, action to cast, it lasts for 8 hours, and as long as you are not wearing armor or using a shield, you can calculate your armor class as 13 plus your dexterity modifier. However, Warlocks do have light armor proficiency, and you could potentially begin the game with a set of studded leather, which has an armor class of 12 plus your dexterity. So essentially, this invocation, it might save you a little gold at the beginning, and it'll give you +1 AC. However, that said, going from a 14 to 15 AC if you have a +2 dex, or a 15 to a 16 AC if you have a +3 dex, you still have a pretty low AC, and that's really not that big of a boost. In terms of demand, though, I'm going to give this a 4. Most Warlock builds can use this, especially at early levels. It is a minor survivability boost, and survivability is one of the weakest aspects of the Warlock. That said, in terms of impact, this is pretty minor. A +1 AC is really not that much. So this gives this a composite score of 6, which lands Armor of Shadows right in the middle of our luxury tier. It's nice to have early, but it's relatively low impact, and I think if you did take it, you'd probably replace it pretty quickly. Next up is Eldritch Mind, also at level 1, and this one says that you have advantage on Constitution saving throws that you make to maintain concentration. Now, Warlocks as a class have pretty limited spell slots, and typically the most bang for your slot is going to be to cast a concentration spell, and this invocation helps you keep those spells up. So, this is something that obviously most Warlock builds can use, so I'm going to give it a 4 on demand. That said, I'm going to give it a 3 on impact. It is decent. However, there are other ways to fortify your concentration, like the Warcaster feat, which does what this invocation does and more. So if your character plans on taking that feat, I don't think I would take this invocation. And if you are multi-classing and have Constitution saving throw proficiency from something like a fighter dip, you probably don't need this. And if you're not planning on concentrating on spells, which I think most Warlocks probably will be, then you also don't need this. But it is pretty good. I also would potentially consider multiclassing for this on another character if you were not planning on taking Warcaster. I think the fact that Warcaster exists does reduce the value of this feat, but it is still a pretty decent one. So, this invocation. So this gives Eldritch Mind a composite score of 7, which lands you right in the top of the luxury group. It's a solid boost. I don't think it offers kind of the build-defining impact that some of our other invocations potentially could have. Next up is the first of our Pact invocations in Pact of the Blade. So this does a bunch of things. So first of all, as a bonus action, we can conjure a Pact weapon in our hand, which can be a simple or martial weapon of our choice with which we bond. Or alternatively, we can bond with any magic weapon that we touch. And we can't bond with someone else's attuned item or someone else's bonded thing if they're another Warlock. And so this will give us proficiency with the weapon, whether we conjured it or it was a magic item, and we can use it as a spellcasting focus, which is great. Additionally, whenever we make attacks with the bonded weapon, keyword can, use our charisma modifier for the attack and damage rolls instead of strength or dexterity, and we can cause the weapon to deal necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage instead of its normal damage type. And the bond ends if we use the bonus action to conjure or bond a different weapon. If the weapon is more than 5 feet away from us for 1 minute or more, or if we die, and conjured weapons disappear when the bond ends. So this is something, this invocation is very transformative to how the way a Warlock plays, and it unlocks a completely different playstyle and that of a weapon using character. Now, important things to note here that instead of, we can use our charisma, you don't have to. One of the things, if you have Pact of the Blade, you might actually want to make a strength or dexterity primary Warlock. And the reason for that actually is because of feats. So a lot of the feats that are going to bump how that are going to increase your martial capabilities increase only strength or dexterity. Think about things like Great Weapon Master, Dual Wielder, Polearm Master, even the Mage Slayer feat, which improves defense. Those are all feats that boost your strength or dexterity. And so if your character is planning on taking more than one of those, it's probably going to make more sense to maximize that stat over charisma. That said, if you're going to go, you can go charisma primary with this. It is potentially worth multi-classing on another charisma primary martial, especially a paladin. And overall, again, this is a very solid invocation. This is also, it's part of what I'm going to call an invocation tree, and you can see that up here. There are 4 other invocations that are gated behind Pact of the Blade. As such, some of the grading I'm going to do for this and other things that have trees is going to depend on how good the kind of tree of invocations actually is. So for demand on Pact of the Blade, I'm going to give it a 3. This is something you want for a specific kind of Warlock build, one that wants to be that kind of hybrid martial caster or spell sword type character. Additionally, again, note that you can get this at level 1, which is something a multi-class character might want to snag to get charisma-based attacks. In terms of impact, I am giving this a 5. This is clearly a build-defining option. It changes the way that your Warlock is going to play. So that lands it in the build-defining tier with a composite score of 8. Next up is Pact of the Chain. So what this does is we learn the Find Familiar spell, and we can cast it as a magic action without spending a spell slot. When we cast the spell, we can choose one of the normal forms for our familiar or one of the following special forms. We can make our familiar an imp, a pseudo-dragon, a quasit, a skeleton, a slod tadpole, a sphinx of wonder, a sprite, or a venomous snake, which are all in Appendix B of the player's handbook. Additionally, when we take the attack action, we can forego one of our attacks to allow our familiar to make one attack of its own with its reaction. Now, the key power here is these extra familiar forms. They are basically super familiars. A lot of these are like CR1 creatures instead of like a CR1 quarter. And at early levels, they can actually be really powerful in combat. One of the big things here is that the fact that the Pact invocations are not exclusive does remove a lot of the opportunity cost from taking this before. And you can get it at level 1 instead of level 3. Importantly, options like the Imp and the Quasit can become invisible at will, and taking the help action doesn't break this invisibility. You can use them to scout, all kinds of very powerful things that you can do with familiars. Another notable synergy is with the Alert Origin feat. If your familiar is invisible at the start of combat, it will have advantage on its initiative roll, and then you could potentially use the alert feat to swap with it, or one of your allies can potentially use their alert feat to swap with it, and that just makes it a great tool to help you boost your initiative, as well as all the other intangible things that a super Find Familiar provides. So it is part of an invocation chain. There's only one other option in the new player's handbook, which is Investment of the Chain Master, which was a direct port out of Tasha's pretty much. So demand for this. This invocation is super powerful, so easy to use, very easy to get. In my opinion, pretty much every Warlock build that it makes sense for from an RP standpoint can and probably should take this invocation. In terms of impact, I'm going to give it a 4. It is very significant, but I wouldn't say it's quite build defining. It's still very good, and the combat abilities of the familiar generally do fall off as you get to higher character levels because it doesn't really scale with you. So this gives us a composite score of 9, which means Pact of the Chain is in a tier of its own, and I consider this in terms of power, basically core to the Warlock class. This is probably the option that I would take at level 1 with my Invocation on pretty much every Warlock that I will ever play. All right, next up is Pact of the Tome, and this one is interesting. It has seen some major changes since the 2014 Player's Handbook. So what this does is, stitching together strands of shadow, we conjure forth a book in our hands at the end of a short or a long rest. This Book of Shadows, which you get to determine how it looks, contains eldritch magic that only we can access, which grants us some benefits. Importantly, the book disappears if we conjure another book with the feature or if we die. So, the benefits that we get. When the book appears, we choose 3 cantrips and 2 level 1 spells that have the ritual tag, which can be from any class. And they must be spells we don't already have prepared. While the book is on our person, we have the chosen spells prepared, and they function as Warlock spells for us, and we can use the book as a spell casting focus. Now, the interesting thing here, with the 2014 version, you were able to like scribe more higher level rituals into your book, but the spells you got, both the cantrips and the rituals, were locked in when you picked the Pact. The cool thing here is that if you conjure a new book, say at the end of a short rest, you can swap out all the cantrips and all the rituals, which offers some really interesting flexibility and versatility. There's also some interesting combinations too with the new Agonizing Blast invocation, which we'll talk about next, with some of the AoE cantrips like Acid Splash or like a Word of Radiance, because even though those spells aren't on the Warlock list, they function as Warlock spells while you have them from Pact of the Tome. In terms of the tree, there's another invocation called Gift of Protectors that's available a little later, but this is the only follow-on invocation in the 2024 Player's Handbook. So in terms of demand, I'm going to give this a 3. I think you want it for specific Warlock builds. It offers a lot of flexible utility, and if you're wanting to make a more support or utility-oriented Warlock, this is the invocation for you. In terms of impact, I'm going to give it a 3. It's decent, but I wouldn't say it's build-defining. Again, good utility, niche combo with Agonizing Blast, but I don't see, this having out-of-this-world impact. Let me know in the comments if you think otherwise and you have some kind of cool combo that you can do with Pact of the Tome. So this gives Pact of the Tome a composite score of 6, which lands it right in the middle of our luxury tier. Now we are moving on to level 2, and our next invocation is Agonizing Blast. This is what I'm taking as part of the cantrip group and the repeatable group. So this requires character level 2, specifically Warlock level 2, and you need to have a Warlock cantrip that deals damage. So we get to choose any one of our Warlock cantrips that deal damage, and we can add our Charisma modifier to that spell's damage rolls. And it is repeatable, which means we can take it more than once, and each time we do, we have to choose a different cantrip. So again, this works with any Warlock cantrip that deals damage, which could include ones you get from Pact of the Tome, like Acid Splash or Word of Radiance. However, that said, Eldritch Blast is still the best candidate for this generally, because you get to apply the bonus damage to each beam of that spell, which is a boost of anywhere from 50% to 90% on that spell, depending on if your Charisma is 3 or 5. So demand, I'm going to give this a 4. Most Warlock builds can make use of this. It is a lower priority for something like a Blade Pact Warlock, who is going to be making attacks instead of casting cantrips. So yeah, those are pretty much the only Warlock builds that probably don't want this. In terms of impact, I'm going to give it a 4. This is a pretty significant damage bump. Again, it almost doubles the damage of Eldritch Blast once your Charisma is capped. However, that said, since it's just damage, I don't think it significantly alters the way that you play. It just kind of amplifies what you're already doing. So this gives Agonizing Blast a composite score of 8, which puts it in the build-defining tier. If you want to make a caster damage dealer Warlock, I think you're probably going to be taking this pretty much all the time. Next up is Devil's Sight at level 2 or higher, and this allows us to see normally in both dim light and darkness, both magical and non-magical, out to a range of 120 feet. This is pretty much unchanged from the 2014 version. It's good if your class doesn't have dark vision, or your character doesn't have dark vision, your race, or for the classic combo with the darkness spell. However, do note the darkness spell was nerfed in that the mode that allows you to cast on an item you're holding was removed. So you can't technically... you can't do the same thing where you cast it on yourself and walk around and have this bubble that moves with you, but the rules don't prohibit you from casting it on a rock on the ground and then picking that rock up with your free object interaction, and then you get the same effect. So I don't know exactly how that would work. Talk to your DM about that if it's something that you want to use, but that is a classic combination, and it will work fairly well to get advantage even if the darkness bubble can't move. So the demand for this, I'm going to say it's a 3. It's something you want on a specific build, and it has a decent impact for those builds that get it, but it's not like a game-shattering combination. This puts the Devil's Sight again as a luxury invocation. Next up is Eldritch Spear. This is another one for cantrips that is repeatable and requires a Warlock cantrip that deals damage. So, and additionally to dealing damage, the cantrip has to have a range of at least 10 feet, and when we cast that spell, its range increases by a number of feet equal to 30 times our Warlock level. So at level 2, this is a 60-foot increase, and you can apply it to different cantrips if you want to take this invocation more than once. I find this one to be a bit odd. Most of the time, you won't really need the massive range increase that this cantrip provides. Remember, like, Eldritch Blast has a range of 120 feet. So demand for this, I think this is really very niche. It's going to be pretty rare in most campaigns that your DM is going to put you on a battlefield that requires a range of more than 120 feet for spells. Maybe if you're doing like a Theater of the Mind long-range chase, you might be able to use it. So that said, when you do get it, if you are in that situation where you have that super long range, you can do some pretty silly things with this, but I think for most of the time, the base range of your cantrips is going to be sufficient. So I'm going to give it an impact of 3. It's decent when it does apply. This puts Eldritch Spear right at the bottom of the luxury tier with a composite score of 5. Next up is Fiendish Vigor. This is from the spells category. So this allows us to cast False Life on ourselves without expending a spell slot. And when we cast the spell with this feature, and remember, anything that casts something without spending a spell slot always casts it at its base level, which is going to be level 1. We don't roll the dice for the temporary hit points. Instead, we automatically get the highest number on the dice. So this feature is going to restore 2d4. Well, it's going to grant us 2d4 plus 4 temporary hit points. So maximum number on that is 12. So this always gives you 12 temporary hit points. This is a lot of survivability early for a Warlock. Like at level 2, this will almost double your hit points. And you can use it, in between encounters to refresh those because it is at will. So this is good, but the value falls off later. In terms of demand, I think most Warlock builds, again, can use this. The challenge is finding space in your invocation list. I think this is also more likely to be useful for a close range Warlock, like those Blade Pact guys, because they're going to be the ones that are going to be more likely to take damage. In terms of impact, I'm going to give this a 3. It is decent. However, the impact is definitely much higher at early levels and falls off later. So I'm going to give it a 3 overall. This gives Fiendish Vigor a composite of 7, which makes it one of the better luxury options. Next up is Lessons of the First One. This is another repeatable invocation. It just requires Warlock level 2. So this says, we have received knowledge from an elder entity of the multiverse, allowing us to gain 1 origin feat of our choice, and we can take this invocation again if we want, and each time we do, we have to choose a different origin feat. This is a pretty strong option, honestly. The value diminishes, obviously, the more origin feats you already have. You would probably be taking better ones first, and so additional ones after the first one or the second one or the third one are going to be less powerful than the ones you got at the beginning, assuming you took them in the right order. So demand for this, I think there are specific builds that want this that can fit it in. This is a great option to take if you don't have a better option for your invocation when you get it. And so if your Warlock build has a lot of specific invocations they need, I don't think you'll have space for this one. In terms of impact, I'm going to give this a 3. I think this is decent. Origin feats are good, but don't completely change the paradigm of your character for the most part, and those ones that are really big you would have taken directly out of your background. This gives it a composite score of 6, which is right in the middle of our luxury tier. Next up is Mask of Many Faces, another thing from the spells category, which allows us to cast Disguise Self without expending a spell slot. Being able to disguise yourself at will is really cool. You could basically appear to be someone else all the time with this while you're conscious. The challenge, of course, is how often that's going to be useful in your campaign. This is an RP-focused option, and I don't think it solves the kind of shenanigans that you're going to be doing, like with illusions and that kind of thing on its own, but it is helpful. So for demand and impact, I'm going to give this a 3 on both. I think this is something specific builds will want in specific campaigns, and I think the impact is going to be decent, but again, not out of this world. This means Mask of Many Faces is yet again another 6, so in the luxury tier. Next up is Misty Visions, which is also another one from the spells group, which gives us Silent Image without expending a spell slot. Again, this is decent, but it suffers from many of the same challenges as Mask of Many Faces. This is going to be good in certain situations, but not all the time. I'm going to give this a 3 and 3 on demand and impact again for those reasons. So that puts Misty Visions also in the luxury tier with a composite of 6. Next up is another spells option, Otherworldly Leap, which lets us cast Jump, though only on ourselves without expending a spell slot. So the new Jump spell is a bonus action and is essentially a 20-foot movement speed increase. It lasts for a minute. You can spend 10 feet of your movement to jump 30 feet. This is also a solid out-of-combat mobility enhancer because it'll let you like jump a 30-foot wall, jump on top of a building, jump gaps. And that is 10 feet to jump up to 30 feet. So you don't have to, fly way above the building and then drop. And I think it also protects you from like the fall damage from that. Now, this is something I'm also going to give a 3 and 3 for demand and impact. This is useful on specific builds. Typically, I think for those melee characters, a movement speed increase, like a melee Pact of the Blade character, is going to be nice. Some Warlock subclasses also have a lot of teleporting, and they probably don't need the mobility enhancer, but this is again something that's nice if you have space and it makes sense. So that puts this right in the middle of the luxury tier with another 6-point composite score. And finally at level 2 we have Repelling Blast, another thing that is a cantrip and repeatable option. This one requires a Warlock cantrip that deals damage via an attack roll. So this does work with more cantrips now. So when we hit a large or smaller creature with the cantrip we choose, we can push the creature up to 10 feet straight away from us. This one in particular works very well with persistent area spells, yours or someone else's, because those spells typically trigger when a creature enters the area for the first time on a turn, and you can use this to push an enemy into that. Eldritch Blast is still generally the best option with this because you can push more than one enemy or the same enemy more than once because every time you hit them and deal damage, if they're large or smaller, you can push them. So demand for this, I'm going to say is a 3. There are specific builds that want it. That said, this is a 4 in terms of impact for those builds, namely for the combination to push enemies into areas or off cliffs and that kind of thing. It doesn't create an entire build archetype on its own, but it is an important part of those combinations. For that reason, I'm going to, this is going to be a 7 on composite, which puts it in one of those better kind of luxury options, in my opinion. Moving on to the level 5 options. Our first one is Ascendant Step from the spells category. This allows us to cast Levitate on ourselves without expending a spell slot. I think the Levitate spell is pretty situational, and it does require concentration, and it basically only lets you go straight up. So if you get hit and you fall, that's going to be painful. And usually a lot of the best uses for this are to like cast it on enemies or allies. And being able to only cast on yourself does hurt a lot for the versatility. I think this is a pretty niche option and the impact is not that significant most of the time, in my opinion. So this gives Ascendant Step a composite score of 4, which makes it our first bad option. I don't think I would really take this outside of some kind of meme character or a very specific campaign. Like if you had one that had a lot of vertical ascents for some reason, this could be good for that campaign specifically. But given that it's at level 5, we could just take the Fly spell, which would probably work better. Next up is Eldritch Smite, which requires Pact of the Blade and level 5. So this says that once per turn, when we hit a creature with our Pact weapon, we can expend a Pact magic spell slot, so it must be a Warlock slot, to deal an extra 1d8 force damage to the target, plus another d8 per level of the spell slot. So when we get this, that's going to be 4d8 damage. And then if the target is huge or smaller, we can give it the prone condition. So this is a pretty powerful burst tool, but this is notably quite expensive for the Warlock, who has very limited spell slots. I think this is something the right build wants if you're like a burst damage dealer. So for that reason, I'm going to give this a 2 for demand and a 3 for impact. I think a niche subset of Pact of the Blade builds want this, and the impact is decent for those builds. You know, if you're in melee and you knock an enemy prone, that'll give you advantage on all your follow-up attacks. And so this is a good burst tool, but it is, again, expensive on our resources. So with a composite of 5, this is going to be one of the more kind of obscure luxury options. And I'm putting it in blue here because this is something that is part of an invocation tree, and we'll use that to kind of differentiate the ones that are and the ones that aren't. Next up is Gaze of Two Minds. This one was updated in the 2024 Player's Handbook, so let's read what it does. So as a bonus action, we can touch a willing creature and perceive through its senses until the end of our next turn. As long as the creature is on the same plane of existence as us, we can take a bonus action on subsequent turns to maintain the connection, extending the duration until the end of our next turn. The connection ends if we don't maintain it in this way. And while perceiving through the other creature's senses, we can benefit from any special senses possessed by that creature, like dark vision or devil's sight or something like that. And importantly, this is a very new thing. We can cast spells as if we were in our space or the other creature's space if the two of us are within 60 feet of each other. So some other updates here. The duration and uses of this are now unlimited, so long as you commit your bonus action. That is a change. Now, there is an interesting case here. Rules as written. If an enemy can't see you, you have advantage on attack rolls against that creature. And being able to cast a spell as if we were in a different space does not change if an enemy can see us or not. So one of the interesting things that you can do with this is that if you're on the other side of a wall, you can cast, say, out of your Chain Pact invisible familiar's position, or from the position of your cleric and that kind of thing, and enemies won't be able to see you. So therefore, rules as written, you should have advantage on those spells if they make attacks. Also, you can't be counterspelled because enemies can't see you casting the spell. So that is something that I find very interesting and potentially very powerful about this option. I think it is also fair. And remember, we are committing our bonus action every single turn to do this. So a bonus action for advantage, that's something a rogue can do with cunning action, hide, or steady aim. I think it's comparable to that. So this is a very interesting option. In terms of demand, I'm going to give this a 3. I think this is something you want for a specific build, but for impact, I'm going to give it a 5. I think this is a build-defining power option. It unlocks a new way to play a Warlock, which is something I would call a remote Warlock. You can basically, again, hide on the other side of a wall and, cast out of a Chain Pact familiar or an ally, which is a really interesting synergy. And I think this is something that is worth exploring, and you can do some really cool things with it. So that lands Gaze of Two Minds in the build-defining tier for Invocations. I think it's a really solid pick, and again, very interesting. Next up is Gift of the Depths, which I think is part of the spells category. So this enables us to breathe underwater, and we gain a swimming speed equal to our speed. Additionally, we can cast water breathing once without expending a spell slot, and we regain the ability to cast it in this way again when we finish a long rest. Water breathing lasts up to 24 hours and can target a bunch of creatures. This is something that is amazing in the right campaign. I think we probably all know what kind of campaign that is. So I'm going to give this a 2 for demand. It is very niche, but in the right campaign, in the conditions where you're going to be going underwater all the time, this is a really significant power boost, and it is good. So this gives Gift of the Depths a composite score of 6. I think it's a luxury option, but that said, in that specific kind of game, the one where you're going underwater all the time, I would take this when it's available pretty much all the time. Next up is Investment of the Chainmaster, which is the follow-on from Pact of the Chain. So when we cast our Find Familiar spell, we can infuse the summoned creature with a measure of our Eldritch power, granting them the following benefits. They gain a fly speed or a swim speed, our choice, of 40 feet. As a bonus action, we can command them to take the attack action. When the familiar deals bludgeoning, piercing, or slashing damage, we can make it deal necrotic or radiant damage instead. If the familiar forces a creature to make a saving throw, it uses our spell save DC instead of the one in its stat block. And then finally, when the familiar takes damage, we can take a reaction to grant it resistance against that damage. There's a lot of benefits here, but in my opinion, the only one that's really that impactful is the spell save DC bullet. A lot of familiars don't have that powerful attacks, and even if they were making attacks, they're not like really that damaging, and a lot of the best abilities out of the more dangerous familiars like the pseudo dragon aren't even attacks at all. Additionally, the familiars are pretty squishy, so having them in melee, it's probably not going to help that much. So in terms, again, I think the spell save DC thing here is the biggest deal. So demand 3, I think this is a specific option for a subset of Chain Pact builds. That said, if you do get this and you're using your familiar to inflict control, boosting the DC of their abilities is a pretty significant impact, so I'm going to give it a 4 on the impact scale. This puts Investment of the Chain Master at 7, which makes it one of the more attractive luxury options. Next up is Master of Myriad Forms, another one from the spells group, which lets us cast the Alter Self spell without expending a spell slot. Now, Alter Self requires concentration, but unlike Disguise Self, its main competitor from Mask of Many Faces, this one actually causes physical change, so anything that you do to alter yourself will hold up under, physical scrutiny. There's also some other uses, like it can let you breathe underwater or attack with claws and that kind of thing, that have some niche applications. A lot of people don't like the concentration requirement of Alter Self versus Disguise Self, but in my opinion, the ability to hold up under physical scrutiny does make this an upgrade over Mask of Many Faces for the most part. Depending on your preferences and if you were using Mask of Many Faces, I might swap it out for this. Notably, this one used to be available like at level 15, so having it at level 5 is definitely a nice buff. With that in mind, I'm going to rate it the same as Mask of Many Faces. I think it's good for specific kind of infiltration, disguise yourself type characters, and it has a decent impact there. So with a composite of 6, I rank this pretty much the same value as Mask of Many Faces, right in the middle of the luxury tier. Next up is one with shadows, another one from the spells group. While we're in an area of dim light or darkness, we can cast invisibility, although only on ourselves, without expending a spell slot. Invisibility basically at will is pretty decent. You used to have to stay in dim light or darkness for the invisibility to last, but you don't have to do that anymore. I think this is, generally speaking, pretty useful. I'm going to give it a 3 for both impact and demand. It's a solid option, again, for specific builds, for infiltrating. I think for the most part, especially if you're sneaking in at night, it's not going to be that difficult to find an area of dim light or darkness, although if you're in broad daylight, this is a little less useful. So a composite of 6 puts this, again, part of our big group of luxury tier options. Next up is Thirsting Blade, another follow on from Pact of the Blade. What this one does is we gain the extra attack feature for our Pact weapon only, and as a reminder, this is text that they put there. With that feature, you can attack twice with the weapon instead of once when you take the attack action on your turn. This is obviously very powerful and build defining for Blade Pact characters. This is one of the reasons why you might have taken Blade Pact to begin with, is to get this extra attack. So for that reason, this is something you want for specific builds. Again, those Pact of the Blades, Spell Sword type builds, and this is clearly a build defining option for those, so it's going to get a 5 on impact. This lands Thirsting Blade right up there with our, in our build defining tier. Moving on to level 7, Whispers of the Grave. This is part of the spells group and lets us cast Speak with Dead without expending a spell slot. I find Speak with Dead to be a situational at best spell, and a lot of other classes have a lot easier access to it. So therefore, I find this to be a very niche and a minor impact in terms of invocation. I almost gave this ones, but I think there are some rare situations where it's going to be good. But again, you're probably not going to be needing to take this on the Warlock. The Cleric can just prepare it because it's one of the spells on their list without any opportunity cost whatsoever. That lands Whispers of the Grave pretty clearly in the bad tier with a composite score of 4. Moving on to level 9, first up is Gift of the Protectors, which is the follow-on from Pact of the Tome. This says a new page appears in our Book of Shadows when we conjure it. With our permission, a creature can take an action to write its name on the page, which can contain a number of names equal to our charisma modifier, a minimum of 1 name. At level 9, we probably have either a +4 or a +5 charisma, so this should be enough to cover ourselves and potentially our entire party. When any creature whose name is on the page is reduced to 0 hit points but not killed outright, the creature magically drops to 1 hit point instead. And once this magic is triggered, no creature can benefit from it until we finish a long rest. And as a magic action, we can erase a name on the page by touching it if we want. This is basically, it's very similar to like a once per long rest death ward spell for somebody in the party. Although, a spell that kills someone outright, like Finger of Death or Disintegrate, will work on this, or like Power Word Kill, because of those things that just kill you outright, and Death Ward does prevent those, and this does not. I don't think, taking Pact of the Tome just to get this is worth it, but if you already have Pact of the Tome, this is something I would consider. So, Demand, I'm going to give this a 2. I think this is, again, niche for those specific Pact of the Tome builds, but again, it has a decent impact if you can fit it in and you already have Pact of the Tome. This makes it one of the low on the totem pole luxury type feats. Well, Invocations. Next up, at level 9, is Lifedrinker, which goes with Pact of the Blade. So this one has been changed. This used to be at level 12 and now has a completely different feature. So once per turn, noted, this can be on our turn or on someone else's turn, like if we got a reaction attack. When we hit a creature with our Pact weapon, we can deal an extra 1d6 necrotic, psychic, or radiant damage of our choice to the creature, and we can expend one of our hit point dice to roll that dice and regain a number of hit points equal to the number rolled plus our Constitution modifier to a minimum of 1 hit point. The extra d6 once per turn and the option to heal a little bit is a decent but not insane boost. So therefore, I'm going to give this a 3 for both Impact and Demand. I think most Blade Pact builds probably want this, but it's not over the top powerful, and the healing potentially can help you sustain in an environment where you're probably going to be taking more damage, that is, being in melee. With a composite score of 6, this lands Lifedrinker right in there with the bulk of our luxury invocation options. Next up at level 9 is Visions of Distant Realms, again part of the spells group, and this allows us to cast Arcane Eye without expending a spell slot. Arcane Eye is actually a really, really good spell for scouting. I'm not going to present it here, but if you want to check it out in the book, it is really good. I think this is quite a good invocation. It also used to be at level 15, and getting it at level 9 is really nice. So for Demand, I think I'm going to give this a 4. I think most Warlock builds can probably make use of this. I think it's a better scout than using even your Chain Pact familiar. The challenge of using this, of course, is space and the situation when it's going to be useful. So I'm going to give it a 3 on Impact for decent. This makes Visions of Distant Realms one of the better luxury invocation options with a composite score of 7. Moving on to level 12 is a new invocation called Devouring Blade for Blade Pact. It requires both Thirsting Blade and by derivative Pact of the Blade. So the extra attack of our Thirsting Blade invocation now confers 2 extra attacks rather than 1. So with this, triple attack, which used to be exclusive to fighters, is now available to Warlocks 1 level later for a peer class character. If you're taking Pact of the Blade and getting this high in levels, you're pretty much always taking this. This is really, really good, and at this point represents about a 50% increase in your damage output. So for that reason, again, this is for specific builds, those Blade Pact builds, so a 3 on Demand. But Impact, this is, again, clearly a build-defining and very powerful thing, which puts Devouring Blade with a composite score of 8 right up there with the rest of our core Blade Pact options, so Pact of the Blade and Thirsting Blade. And finally, the last invocation in this book is Witch Sight, which gives us True Sight out to a range of 30 feet. Now, what does True Sight do? So let's just see both normally in both magical and non-magical darkness. We can see creatures and objects that have the invisible condition. Visual illusions appear transparent to us, and we automatically succeed on saving throws against them and any effects they might create. We can also discern the true form of any creature or object that has been transformed by magic. And we can see into the ethereal plane. This is kind of like an upgrade to Devil's Sight. Now, that said, the questions here are how often is this going to be useful, and do you have space? So for that reason, I'm going to give it a 3 on demand. You want this on specific characters and specific campaigns if you have space. And for those situations where you're facing things where this is going to be applicable often, it will be a good option. A composite score of 6 puts this right there with the rest of our luxury options. Okay, so that's all the invocations out of the 2024 Player's Handbook. What are some other ones that are notable? So there's a few ones that weren't reprinted that you might want to consider. I'm not going to rate these, and I'm just going to go over them briefly in no particular order on how good they are. First up is Cloak of Flies out of Xanathars. This basically, as a bonus action, enables you to have a short range kind of poison damage emanation with a few kind of social benefits. This is interesting, a cool option potentially if you're playing a Blade Pact character and have space and need some persistent AoE damage. Next is Gift of the Ever-Living Ones, also out of Xanathars. This is a Chain Pact invocation, and what this does is it maximizes all healing that you receive while your Chain Pact familiar is within 100 feet of you. This has really cool synergy, like with the new Lifedrinker invocation, to maximize the healing out of that dice. And if you have a healing character in your party, like a cleric or a bard or something, and you're taking a lot of damage as a warlock, this is a cool one to consider. It will make it so you're able to heal up pretty efficiently, and it works, even out of combat if you're spending hit dice on short rests. Another cool one, again out of Xanathars, is Grasp of Hadar. So this grants Eldritch Blast a once per turn 10-foot pole directly toward you. This again works well with area spells like Repelling Blast. If you're kind of doing that thing where you're pushing and pulling and manipulating enemies' positions with Eldritch Blast, I think this is a good one to consider, although I would take it after Repelling Blast. Another option out of Xanathars is Improved Pact Weapon. This allows you to conjure ranged weapons like crossbows or longbows with your Pact of the Blade, and it gives your Pact weapon a +1 magic bonus if it doesn't already have it. I think this is something they might reprint soon in an altered form, although it is a potential, nice option to give yourself a magic weapon if you don't already have one. And then also for Eldritch Blast out of Xanathars, we have Lance of Lethargy. This grants Eldritch Blast a once per turn 10-foot slow on targets, and this potentially stacks pretty well with things like Repelling Blast or Grasp of Hadar for positional control. And again, I would take this, after Repelling Blast if that's something that you want. It's a minor but interesting thing for that kind of build. And then Tomb of Levistus, also out of Xanathars. This is a pretty cool option. It gives you basically a break glass in case of emergency reaction. You get 10 times your Warlock level and temporary hit points. This requires level 5, so that's going to be a minimum of 50. But then it incapacitates you until the end of your next turn and gives you vulnerability to fire damage. And the temporary hit points also ends at the end of your next turn. And this is a once per rest feature. So again, cool option. It's like, I'm going to save my life at the cost of my next turn. Interesting thing to consider. And then Pact of the Talisman wasn't reprinted at all in the new Player's Handbook. Pact of the Talisman and a couple invocations that go with it are out of Tasha's. I think you could probably homebrew the Pact boon and just make it an invocation that you could take at level 1. And then you should be able to take the kind of other talisman invocations as is. Pact of the Talisman in general is a really cool support option because the benefits from it apply to the person who's wearing the talisman, which doesn't actually have to be you. So that's all the invocations plus some old ones I think you might find useful. And hey, if you made it this far into the video, you probably like and enjoy this content. If you're not subscribed, be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any content. So once again, thanks for watching. My name is Nathan. I hope you catch the next video, which is going to be covering the Warlock core class, which is going to be coming very soon. See you later.